Hi there, Mercedes owners. Today in your 2020 Mercedes Sprinter 3500, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install Sumo springs for the rear axle. I would also recommend Sumo springs for the front axle to get the best riding experience in your Sprinter. All right, now before we install our Sumo springs, we're going to hit our test course here just to get a baseline of how the suspension feels on this motorhome. So we're going to start by hitting our uneven bumps course, and this is going to simulate like hitting a pothole. And there is quite a bit of sway that this thing has. I mean, you definitely feel some good rocking going on here. So if you got some passengers that were in the back or something, I bet they're, it's almost like getting seasick a little bit. Next, we're going to be hitting the even bump section, which is going to simulate like going over a speed bump or turning in and out of a driveway. So this is going to be our forward to back. Our Sumo springs should help to dampen out this, as well as help reduce some of that sway that we had from the uneven bump section, because there is quite a bit of rocking. When we hit there, when we kind of hit the even bumps, we get some up movement. It's got kind of some bounces. Our Sumo spring should help to minimize the amount of oscillations up and down that we have. And now we're going to head into our slalom section, which is where we're going to mimic an evasive maneuver. And this is usually where I find that the biggest difference between Sumo springs and no Sumo springs are, but before and after our suspension enhancements, is usually in this section here. Oftentimes, we get a nice reduction in sway that makes the vehicle feel much more responsive and like you just had much more control. So let's get into it here. We've got a pretty decent speed going, and let's see how she feels. Oh, and it does have some sway. It's a little bit sketchy. I'm gonna slow her down just a little bit here, because it does got some good rocking going. Not as bad as your bigger Class A motorhomes, but it definitely feels like if you were to give it a good hard turn, it could be potentially something that could get out of hand. So we're gonna head back to the shop now. We'll get the Sumo springs installed, and then we'll see how it compares. All right, we got our Sumo springs installed. We're back out here on the test course again. We're gonna hit the uneven bump section once again, simulate those potholes and things like that. And already right out the gate, there is quite a big difference. It's a lot softer when we hit them. We don't have nearly as much sway. It's almost like we can just feel the suspension moving. Now, once we got into it there, we kind of hit one back to back. It did start to build up a little bit of sway, but definitely quite a bit of reduction from where we were before. Now we're gonna hit the even bump section. And when we hit this here, it does feel like we're a little bit softer when we hit it. It's almost like it's maybe a little bit harder on the initial hit, but we don't have the oscillations, which is really where the control comes in. If we're not bouncing around, it's a lot easier for me to keep control of the vehicle. So it'll help out quite a bit there. Now, we did also install a set of Sumo springs in the front. So we've got a set of front and rear Sumos on here to compare with just the factory Jounce bumpers in the front before. Now we're gonna head into that slalom section here. And based on how it felt in the bumps course, I feel like we're gonna be able to take this at quite a bit of a higher speed than we were before, be a little more aggressive with it because it feels like it's gonna respond a lot better. All right, so we're coming into that section now. Let's get a little bit more speed than we had before and see how she feels. Yeah, and this feels pretty good. Like, it definitely still has some sway, but if something were to get out in front of you, I would feel a lot more confident that I would be able to make the maneuver that I need to make without losing control, versus before it was a little bit sketchy in comparison. It's still not going to be a Cadillac or a Mazda 3 driving around. You're not going to zoom like that, but you're definitely going to have a much more comfortable, more confident driving experience with these on than before. And your passengers are going to appreciate that as well. It just feels a whole lot better, especially at these little bit higher speeds here. It really seems to glide out in comparison to where we were before. And this is what our Sumo spring looks like when it's installed. It provides us a constant contact between the frame and the axle here when our suspension is loaded down. And that's going to give us a dynamic assistance with our factory suspension to help reduce road impacts and minimize sway. It's able to do this because of the softer material that's here, unlike your regular Jounce bumper that's about half this size, maybe even a little bit less, which is made of a very dense, hard rubber, which is just there to stop the suspension from having metal to metal contact. It's just for when it's completely bottomed out. With our Sumo spring here, it's going to be completely dynamic throughout your suspension travel range, and it will provide more support the more we compress it. So this is great for evening out a motorhome that maybe is a little bit uneven on its load or its weight. If you got a little bit more on one side than the other, you can put these in here and that can help support that to help keep you a little bit more upright, help balance things out a little bit. They also work really well for helping to minimize sway, because as we have we maybe make a hard turn to the right, or if we pass by a big semi with a big crosswind and the body starts to roll to either the left or to the right. The Sumo spring will want to compress. For example, if our body's rolling to the left, like maybe we made like a little bit of a hard right turn and the body goes to roll to the left here, this side's going to come down and it's going to compress this. And then this Sumo spring here doesn't want to compress really. It wants to stay in its normal resting position. So it's going to kind of push back. It wants to be in that position. So as the body goes over, the Sumo spring's like, no, I don't think so. And it pushes you back upright. And then it works both ways. So maybe it pushes you back up and it kind of wants to go this way. Some of your motorhomes really rock back and forth. Well, that side over there is going to counteract when it wants to go that way. So it really minimizes the amount of oscillations back and forth you got, helps reduce sway, gives you more confidence when have to make an evasive maneuver, and it helps to absorb those road impacts as you're going down the road. So what this is going to do for you is all your passengers are going to enjoy a more comfortable ride when going to your destination, and you're going to have some reduced fatigue because you're not going to have to compensate as much for those heavy crosswinds and things like that due to sway that you had previously. And the rubberized material on our Sumo spring here is road grime and UV resistant, so you don't have to worry about oils and other grimes on the road collecting on this and breaking down the material. With that UV resistance, it's also nice too to help keep it from drying out over many years of use. So now that we've covered some of the features of our Sumo springs, why don't you follow along with me and we'll show you how to get it installed. These are extremely easy to install. It's probably going to take you longer to get your motorhome parked, get your jacks and tools out than it is to actually put the parts on. I would say start to finish of getting the motorhome together and all your tools is something you can probably have done in less than an hour, probably even 45 minutes or less. We'll begin our installation here at the back of the vehicle. We're going to do this one side at a time. That way we leave the other side still on the ground. I do still recommend chalking the wheels in your motorhome when doing this. You could lift the whole back end up, but you definitely got to have them chalked. Then there's a risk for roll. That's why I wanted to like to leave one side down. It helps to minimize any risks. So we just put it here underneath the hitch here at the back. We just jacked it up. We just need to have enough room to be able to fit this between the axle and the frame where our original Jounce bumper is located. Only tools we're going to need for this is a pry bar is really useful. You don't want too big a one. You want one that's going to be small enough to be able to stick inside there to pop that old one out. It also helps to pop this in. And a little bit of silicone spray here will help these slide in and out easier. So let's go ahead and head underneath and get that old Jounce bumper removed. So here we are underneath the vehicle. There's our Jounce bumper there. We need to remove this factory Jounce bumper. And you can see here we've jacked it up and placed our jack stand under it to support it, and we are going to have enough room. The top of it here hangs down below the frame where it's going to slide in there. So we know we got it up high enough. To get these Jounce bumpers removed, a little bit of silicone spray can make things a little bit easier. Let's put a little bit of that on there. And there's an opening here in the center of our Jounce bumper. That's why if you got a pry bar that's small enough that you can fit it inside of there, just like this, maybe give it a little tap to get it in there a little further, and then just kind of give it a twist like this, and it just pops right out of there. And then you can take this thing off of here. We can just set that aside. We're now ready to put our new one up. But before we do, let's just take a quick comparison of the two here. So our Sumo spring here on the right, you can tell is way bigger than the factory Jounce bumper here on the left. And what that's going to do for us is give us a more constant contact. It's not going to be 100% if you go over a huge bump. The axle does still have full free range of motion, but under most circumstances, when you're on the ground and your vehicle's loaded, the Sumo spring here is going to be making contact with the axle and the frame. And that way we're going to get support from this throughout the majority of our suspension travel here. So you can see there's a huge difference between these two. So let's get this guy installed now. You'll notice here that we've got these little slots. Those will slide up into these grooves here. And they are offset. If you read your instructions, it tells you to place the side that has a notch cut out of it towards the rear. But if you look here, there's no notch cut out on this side. There's no notch cut out on this side. As far as I can tell, they're pretty much identical. It does look like this one side here is ever so slightly longer than this side. And I chose to put the longer side towards the front just because it made it easier to install. It should hang in there just fine. It has a little bit of forward and backward movement, so you can adjust it over the axle. To get it installed, we're going to take that slightly longer edge there. We're going to slip it right into the groove there and push it as far forward as we can. We'll then take our silicone spray, put a little bit of that on there to make things easier. Take our pry bar now, and we're going to push kind of right about in the center here. And then it'll just pop right up in there. And then this will slide back and forward. And then I just kind of pull it to where it kind of centers it over the axle. That's pretty centered right there. And that's all there is to it. You'll simply just repeat that same procedure over on the other side to get that one installed. If you're doing it like we are, you'll just need to lower your jack down, move it over to the other side, jack this side up, and then you can perform all these procedures. All right, we went ahead and completed the other side and then lowered our vehicle back down. We can see that they are touching on the strike pads on both sides. They're nice and centered. Everything looks good here at this point. So we're now ready to go for a test drive, make sure everything's working okay, and then we should wrap it all up. And that completes our installation of Sumo springs for the rear axle on our 2020 Mercedes Sprinter.